Welcome to the next generation of warfare, psychological warfare. In modern conflict, the mind is a potent weapon. Discover General Michael T. Flynn's groundbreaking guide, The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. Unlock tactics, strategies, and the mindset to navigate this cognitive battlefield that we all find ourselves in. Equip yourself against manipulation and emerge unscathed. Unleash your potential. Order now.
How's it going, everybody? It is April 1st. So, happy April Fool's Day. I don't know how you greet that one. It's hard to believe anything that's said on this particular day, but there will be no April Fool's jokes tonight on this episode, at least none that I'm aware of. So again, while it's Operation Gladio night, you guys, chapter number 92, we're going to be talking CIA, Nazis, the Japanese, and science. So this is going to be pretty interesting. So before we do that, let's take care of a couple of bills, and then we'll get the show started because I know the Colonel is ready to go. Rumble Wallet, folks. They can cancel your accounts, freeze your cards, decide what you're allowed to buy, say, or support. Big banks and financial institutions have total control, and they use it. That's why financial independence matters more now than ever. Introducing Rumble Wallet, a wallet built for real freedom. With Rumble Wallet, you control your money, not a bank, not a government, not a tech company. Buy digital assets like Tether, Tether Gold, and Bitcoin in one secure place. No permission, no middleman, no cancel button. And when you want to support the creators you actually believe in, you can use the Rumble Wallet app to directly tip creators securely, instantly, and without interference. This isn't a credit line that they can shut off. It's your wallet permanently. Yours to protect your future, yours to protect your family. When the system fails, and it will, when institutions turn on their own people, and they have, financial sovereignty is the difference between security and vulnerability. Rumble Wallet isn't about politics, it's about freedom, ownership, and protecting what's yours. So take control today, download the Rumble Wallet now, and step away from the big banks for good. True ownership, true protection, true financial freedom. And that QR code is on the screen if you're watching on the Rumble platform. And if you're watching live, that link is in the chat. And if you're watching the replay, that will be down in the description with all the other links. In our last commercial for now, we'll have some later, and then we'll bring on the Colonel.
Science proves that a healthy immune system is the body's first defense against the smallest of ailments to the most catastrophic. Coriolus versicolor is the most sought-after, all-natural supplement for both humans and pets to help boost the immune system. There are over 400 studies worldwide on its effectiveness in humans, including Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and now from the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. Together, we can help reverse this terrible tide now plaguing your loved ones and give them the immune-boosting supplements that they need.
Remember, folks, do me a solid, support the people that support this show. And with that, let me welcome the Colonel to the stage. Colonel, it's been about 2 weeks that we've been off. So, you know, we're back in action now, and a pretty interesting topic. Where are we starting at?
Okay, so we're going to start way back when and bring it all the way to today. So the story begins with a guy that I just recently came across. His name's Rudolf Steiner. He's a old guy. Kind of, you would put him as like a philosopher. That he's described as a polymath, which is somebody that knows a lot about a whole lot of stuff. Kind of like a miniature Einstein kind of a guy. And he was from Austria. And he founded a thing called anthroposophy, which it was in the early 1900s. And basically his philosophy was human beings are created as a layered entity, and that there was physical, psychic, moral, and spiritual layers inside of each person. He was not religious at all, but spiritual, almost kind of in a atheist way. And he basically had set up this anthroposophy as a umbrella, if you will, of those four main principles. He said that he wanted to create a disciplined way to understand unseen structures in ordinary life. So he basically looked into like the esoteric mysticism type, which I found very interesting because a lot of the Nazis, which gave us Operation Gladio eventually, was into this mysticism stuff. And I don't normally spend a lot of time in that, but I find it very interesting because they would embrace the church, but only to use it, because they were not like you and I as far as Christians. But they did have this kind of, like, they were very focused on moon cycles, and they had these weird sexual rituals that they would perform around the lunar. The whole thing is just really weird. And I'm just trying to describe how weird these people are because it's going to matter in a minute. He also thought that there was a way to capture natural things like organic gardening and stuff like that, but kind of in a weird, again, doing gardening around the lunar cycle. It was all kind of creepy. So he was born in 1861 in what is now known as Croatia, but his parents were Austrian. And he kind of gravitated around the Central Europe area with and dabbled in philosophy, science, occultism, and reform movements. That was kind of his thing. And he coined a phrase called spiritual science. So he's going to be very much into science. But like, again, almost like in a satanic way. He also described the universe as a hierarchy of planes, emphasizing karma and reincarnation. And reincarnation is another entity that I find in some of these philosophers that gravitated around Hitler and that whole movement. And it was also in the Fabian Society, where their fundamental belief was that it's okay to kill people because they're reincarnated, and every time they come back, they're closer to being their own God. So they believed everybody could be inspired to become godlike themselves because they don't recognize God. And that's kind of how they rationalized wars and, abortion, eugenics, all of that stuff. They didn't care about killing people because the way they viewed it was, oh, you're going to be right back. And next time when you come back, you're going to be a better you. So you have to understand this to be able to contextualize some of the evil stuff that they do.
You start removing people's ideology of consequence from the spiritual mindset, and people will be much more adamant to doing,
bad things.
Yeah.
And he said, human beings are not fixed beings. They're just a development project, to be like experimented on. And so that's kind of the fundamental piece of who this guy is. And he was very, very influential. during that time, especially in the Austrian area. And why is that important? Because Hitler's from Austria, Otto Skorzeny's from Austria. And so you see a lot of these original players grew up in this type of environment. He also said the line between education, therapy, and control becomes thin once human development is treated as a problem for trained managers. That's freaking scary. Okay.
Did you see the logo that he runs, the shape of it?
Yeah, show it.
And bring this up on the screen for everybody. Let me scroll down. Some of you are not going to be shocked. Some are going to take offense to that comment I just made right there.
Yep.
There's two symbols there. Let me see if it can I click on it to make it bigger? There we go. Let me see if I can zoom in on this for people. There we go.
Very recognizable, isn't it?
Yeah, especially the smaller one right above it.
Yeah.
So just for those, you have the Star of David, and then right above the Star of David, you have the swastika.
Yeah. Isn't that weird?
Mm-hmm.
So you can see the direct lineage here developing. Okay. So this is the mental atmosphere that these people were growing up in that were within his circles. This is the scary part. One of his, we'll talk about him in a minute, but people that were in elite schools, reform institutions, and professional circles all gravitated to him as a philosopher. It also says that the idea circulated that people could be shaped according to hidden laws. That logic was part of Steiner's spiritual hand, and that it could become hard and coercive when placed within the state to use this philosophy. The deeper irony is that his science, that anthroposophy, had a concern for the quote unquote inner human, and that it was integrated into many of the curriculum, medical clinics, and institutions of the time. And it's one of the articles I was reading said, once that worldview took root, it was only a matter of time before more powerful institutions began applying it to the mind itself, which is basically the birth of MK Ultra. World War II became a great accelerator for this ideology. And we noticed that the experiments that happened both with the Japanese and Nazi Germany kind of gravitates around this thing. And across Europe and Asia, state science increasingly treated human bodies as raw material. The war, of course, did not invent the cruelty, but it industrialized it and gave it an administrative form. In Japan, Unit 731 under Shiro Ishii conducted lethal research on prisoners and civilians in the name of biological warfare. In Nazi Europe, human experimentations became part of the machinery, both in wartime medicine and in the death camps. They were not isolated atrocities, but a symptom of this broader philosophy that many of the people embraced. And so I went back and did some research into, we'll get to that in a minute, but the main Nazi scientist that kind of formulated the biological warfare and human experimentation for the Nazis was a guy by the name of Kurt Blome, Blome. He's very, very important because in his work, he actually said that he was inspired by this guy. Okay, so he's like a prodigy of that guy. So that's his mindset too. He's embraced this completely. Okay. So let's see.
This is weird. I don't know if my brain's just tripping tonight, but the first gentleman, the Rudolf Steiner guy, let me just bring him up real quick. When you look at his image, his face reminds me of John Cena, however people want to say it.
Ooh.
You know, WWF.
Kind of.
Yeah,
right.
he has that look to it. And then we get into this Kurt guy, and he reminds me of the dude from the Addams Family. Granted, it could be the jacket, and I understand, pinstripe jacket was, something of the time, but it's just interesting given, all the other conspiracies and stuff that we go into. And obviously these are not conspiracies. These are legit events.
Okay. So Kurt Blome, his wartime knowledge focused in on pathogens, toxicology, and delivery systems to basically harness and use against enemy forces. So that was the exact same methodology for the Japanese Unit 731. So the incorporation of these two philosophies, the one that the Japanese embraced and the one that the Germans embraced, matter because it normalized a principle. If scientific knowledge was strategically valuable, then the violence used to obtain it could be excused. A society that accepts this principle has already become a dangerous enemy, right? Because life has no value to them. You are basically a subject in an experiment, both in a wartime setting, but the general population, because they don't see you as a human. They basically see you as this thing that's presented in front of them that if they kill it, it's just going to come back to life.
I mean, you could argue, Colonel, that our society is suffering because of that ideology now as a whole.
100%. Because that's how you get the whole trans thing. It's how you get abortion. That's how you get everything. That's why this is so important to understand the roots of this ideological outlook. So Sidney Gottlieb was basically a protege. He worked and cited Kurt Blome. So you're seeing kind of and Sidney Gottlieb is the guy that ran MK Ultra, Artichoke, and created all the poison for the CIA, right? Okay. So Gottlieb his actual name is Joseph Snyder. So he was born in 1918 in the Bronx to Jewish Hungarian immigrants. And again, you're talking Eastern European. So you're getting that kind of same where all of these people's original ideas came from. He's basically one of their disciples. And that kind of solved a mystery for me, because you don't just create people like this, right? They don't just pop out of thin air and be this evil. So this is kind of a lineage of where his ideas come from. And he would, Sidney Gottlieb would earn a doctorate in biochemistry at Caltech. And at the time, Caltech was home to a lot of elite research that had intelligence sponsorship while he was there doing his PhD. So he basically could be described as a technician of the invisible. That was a phrase that was used to describe him, meaning covert operations. He worked in chemistry, toxicology, and covert operations. He was in the phrase that was later attached to him, the CIA's poisoner in chief. But that's actually understates what his entire scope was. He wasn't just a poison expert. He actually built the architecture of covert experimentation on the human mind. He was a member of the California branch of that anthroposophical cycle or circle. That's how I went back and looked at where that came from and was able to kind of trace the lineage, because I found his membership in a chapter of it in California. And I'm like, I've never even heard of that. And so you go back and you find out who the father is, and he's basically a mystic, Satanist kind of weirdo guy. And he is attached to the chief Satanist mysticist chemist in Nazi Germany. And I'm like, oh, crap. So it kind of tied that whole circle together for me. They all go around this anthroposophical circle of, and basically it creates a bridge of technical science and esoteric thought. So I just found that incredibly interesting. So before MK Ultra became notorious, there was Project Artichoke. Artichoke was the CIA's early effort to explore whether interrogation, hypnotists, narcotics, and psychological stress could compel compliance or produce disorientation. It basically reflected the Cold War fears of, what was used as a justification for even exploring this is that people could be brainwashed. And of course, the most notorious part of that is during the Korean War. This is what they use as an excuse, because it proved later it was all made up. So they said during the Korean War, there were Americans captured by the North Koreans, and they confessed on camera. And the US immediately said, oh, they've been brainwashed. They tortured them. They did some awful, evil experimentation on them and got them to do that. It was later revealed none of that was true. But that became Alan Dulles' excuse to basically give Sidney Gottlieb a blank check to do all of these evil experiments for Artichoke and MK Ultra. And it was all based on a lie. That's not what happened to those people at all. Artichoke is important because it revealed the method before the institution became fully public in hindsight. This was the phase when intelligence agencies were still testing the edges of what they could do, still asking whether the mind could be penetrated. The answer they sought wasn't theoretical. They wanted actual practical tools to do exactly that, because they wanted a Manchurian candidate. They wanted to be able to program people to kill with a blank mind that wouldn't remember they were the killer afterwards. That was ultimately their goal. And the transition from Artichoke to MK Ultra marked a shift in the exploratory experimentation to an expansive research regime, which of course would include Fort Detrick and all of the military medical research facilities as well. The logic remained the same. If consciousness is vulnerable, then power can exploit that vulnerability. That's the way they viewed people. So MK Ultra became the umbrella under which the CIA explored drugs, hypnotics, sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation, electroconvulsive techniques, shock therapy, and other methods intended to destabilize identity and memory. Sidney Gottlieb oversaw the program's chemical dimension. The agency's funding structure was hidden, often routed through front organizations and universities to make the work entirely invisible to the population. LSD became significant because it offered what seemed like a shortcut into the architecture of perception. If one could alter subjective reality rapidly and intensely, they could interrupt resistance in the subject, which would weaken their sense of self and induce amnesia. That was the thought. This was the promise that made LSD so attractive to the CIA. The tragedy is that the search for the leverage often fell on people who had no meaningful choice in the matter, because who are their test subjects? Prisoners, patients in mental hospitals that had no relatives, soldiers, you and I, and civilians that they could unwittingly draw into their experiments, like the people out in Northern California when they were running all of those prostitutes and slipping LSD to men, and then watch how they operated in hidden rooms. The point was not to heal anybody. The point was to exploit people. There was a phrase I ran across called LSD artichoke. It basically captured the continuity between the CIA's earlier coercive work and its later hallucinogenic experiments. Artichoke focused on interrogation, suggestibility, and control. LSD added a chemical means to get all of those, to use in interrogation, to use in the suggestibility, like, manipulating people, and then later controlling them. Gottlieb later acknowledged the CIA's interest in LSD and its unpredictable effects. That unpredictability didn't disqualify it. That's the whole reason they were using it. The unpredictability was very useful. A disoriented subject is easier to destabilize, and a destabilized person may become easier to manipulate. But one of the other facets of using it is, how some people, them and they're just a normal person, right? It can be a college professor, it can be a congressman. And what the CIA would do is they would sneak them LSD, and then they would go apeshit crazy, right? So if you're a professor and you've stumbled across one of these, mind melding new things, technology that would render, let's just say it was the engine in a car that doesn't require gasoline anymore. Well, obviously, the oil companies aren't going to want you to be able to produce that, right? So what they would do is they would use the LSD, they would sneak it to this Einstein guy that had this great idea. He'd start acting like an idiot and be totally crazy. And you discredit him and whatever ideas he has. And now he's looked upon as this blithering idiot. And they did the same thing with people that
you turn them into a 5150 nut path.
Yes. And they get committed. And, you know, some people suggest that in addition to LSD, there are some other chemicals that were used that does basically the same thing. And that's how you get the Britney Spears and all. And that's why these trainers, these people that administer the supplements, are so critical to these operations. It's how they control the people. And so you get them to act crazy, you get them committed, and then you become their caretaker and you control them. I mean, it's evilly brilliant.
It is. There's a part here that I was reading, and it says Dulles and Gottlieb both believed that there was ways to influence and control the human mind that could lead to global mastery. So, like the Manchurian candidate, what you're talking about. They also wanted a truth serum, something that they had been investigating during the days of the OSS, but never fully realized. Gottlieb conducted experiments using THC, cocaine, heroin, mescaline before realizing LSD had not been properly tested or investigated by the agency. After trying LSD for the first time himself, Gottlieb accelerated LSD experiments at the agency, testing it on agents who agreed to be dosed under controlled environments and some who agreed to be dosed by surprise. LSD has been synthesized only 13 years earlier. After months of experimenting on agents, Gottlieb sought help from the Special Operations Division at Dietrich. And it goes on for Dulles' brother was the one that, you know, kind of oversaw the project that they were doing. And then he later goes on to describe it as a battle for brain warfare. Like conversations we're talking about right now.
Yes. Exactly. This is where it came from.
You know, before we started the show, I was telling Colonel, you guys know Trump did, he addressed the nation tonight, and it was very quick, maybe 10 minutes, 15, if even that. It was very, very quick. But I told Colonel, I go, there's a whole lot of hype for this. And if you've been following President Trump's posts, you know, his messaging, stuff that Rubio's saying and Hegseth and all these guys are saying, it was like, there was nothing new. And, you know, some people say, well, he said a timeline, you know, 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah, but that timeline's consistent with the one he said all the way back after the February 20th attack when he said 6 to 8 weeks. So we already knew the timeline. Like there was nothing new. But there was a lot of hype put behind it. And so it's just weird. I told Colonel, I love my president, but I'm going to start calling him the crazy old man. Because I'm gonna go address the country. I'm gonna let everybody know what's going on. Everybody's like, yeah, we're gonna know what's going on. Yeah, we already knew that. Like, hey, pops, like we knew that. Like, what's going on? And it just again, it goes into this is mind warfare. Like, there's mind warfare going on right now. Whether you agree with it, because I'm a firm believer that both sides are doing it, not just the bad guys. And I know there's a moral and ethical argument there, and I understand that, and I won't say people are wrong for that position.
Well, I think it depends on how you define mind warfare. The people that are stuck in the matrix, there are techniques to use to wake them up. That's not a bad thing. That's basically like deprogramming somebody in a cult.
The discombobulator.
Yes, that's not a bad thing. That is not an evil thing. When you're doing it for evil purposes to control them, to create a Manchurian candidate that'll go out and be an assassin and then not have any memory of it, that's evil. But if you're deprogramming that person, which is kind of the counterinsurgency mind warfare, then you can't say that's bad.
I agree with you. There's people that don't. I agree with you, but there are people that don't agree with us.
I just want everybody to understand that. If you have an insurgency, the only way to deal with an insurgency is counterinsurgency. They're both two types of warfare. And so if we know that we've been under a mind warfare for the last 75 years, if not longer, then the only way you counter that is with your own war plan.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
Before you continue on, Colonel, I want to get one more commercial in.
Sure.
But to that thought, I just want to add to it because I'm on the same page with you
I know you
completely
are.
on that. And the pushback I usually get from people on that is, no, he just needs to come out and just tell us everything. And I get that. But people have to understand Trump's priorities. It's priority number one, preservation of the republic. Priority number two, preservation of life. And priority number three, preservation of property. Like that. That's how he's looking at these things, right? And if choosing the way of the discombobulator is going to save thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives, that's the decision he's going to make. And I agree with it.
So let me add to that and say that I have read a lot about when you have someone that has been subjected to this, especially someone over a long period of time, if you just come right out, you shatter their brain, you shatter their mind, and they are broken for the rest of their life. And that is what we're trying to avoid.
I'm there with you. So with that, speaking of tactical stuff, folks, I was like, yes, I want more of these kind of things. You'll see that QR code pop up on the screen. What are we talking about? Have you ever wondered what it feels like to shoot with the same precision tech used by the U.S. Special Forces? Well, good news. After years of research and development, MCG Tactical has just dropped something incredible, the Stinger Combat Sight. This isn't your average red dot. Using holographic technology, once reserved for elite military and law enforcement, the Stinger delivers crystal clear precision, so accurate you could hit a dime at 300 yards without even trying. This is the exact same level of technology used by the pros, but here is the twist. There's always a twist. This one's good. Most sites like to go for $600 or more. The people happily pay it. I would. I have. But right now, through an exclusive deal with MCG Tactical, you can get this mil-spec sight for under $200. And it gets better. For you guys, my listeners, you're going to get 67% off, and they're covering the shipping. Just scan the QR code on your screen, or you can go to mcgtac.com/alpha a little bit later to get yours today. The only catch, supply is tight, and these are already flying off the shelves. So if you want a site built for the best, now's your shot. Grab yours before they have been shut down with orders. Again, limited time. The Stinger sale is on, so shop before it's gone. Scan that QR code. That QR code is working right now. And like I said, after the show, you can go to mcgtac.com/alpha, and you can pick that one up there. And with that, Colonel, I'll give it right back to you.
Okay, so Gottlieb represented covert chemistry. There was another person by the name of Dr. Ewan, E-W-E-N Cameron, who represented medicalizing the destruction of personality. He worked at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada. Cameron pursued methods that included heavy sedation, sensory deprivation, repetitive audio messages, and psychic driving, which was a technique to basically blank out your brain and reconstruct it. And he was also part of, because this is all part of MK Ultra. This guy, this Cameron guy, Alan Dulles' son was injured in the Korean War, and he sent his son up to have this shit done to his son. That's how evil that man was. He even had one of the CIA doctors give his niece a lobotomy.
How much of a psychopath?
Yes.
Do you have to be to send your own family?
Yes. Yes. That's how bad he was. People have no idea how evil Alan Dulles was.
And shout out Breadmaker62 gifting those 5 subscriptions. Thank you for that, Bread.
Yeah.
Man, your son, like that's your bloodline.
Yes. Yeah. That guy. Cameron's significance lies in the fusion of clinical authority and coercive ambition. He didn't appear as a spy. He appeared as a psychiatrist. That made his work very dangerous. It shows how medical language can become a vehicle for violence. And when coupled with a secret state project, evil. His work, along with Gottlieb's, fit together like two halves of one machine. One attacked the self through chemicals and environmental disorientation. The other attacked it through ideology and decomposing and rebuilding a human mind. All of this now, so we've talked about a little bit about the German guy and a little bit about the CIA. But when you compare it to Unit 731, which was Japan's program that was set up in China during World War II, ISHI's program had already demonstrated the dehumanizing power of state science. Human beings were reduced to data. Bodies became test material. Pain became research resources. The logic didn't disappear at the end of the war. It just migrated to the CIA. The post-war intelligence and medical worlds didn't copy Unit 731 mechanically. They absorbed it into their architecture. If a state can imagine a person as a carrier of useful information rather than a moral subject, then torture and experimentation became much easier to justify. And that's what they got from Unit 731. This is also why the post-war fate of the participants is so telling. Many escaped any accountability. Some moved into new institutions. Some were sheltered by the very system that had benefited from their work. The result was a kind of moral laundering, expertise survival, and reputations were lied about by the United States government in the aftermath of the war. What happened was the German guy was actually brought to the United States and kind of, at least for a period, he goes back to West Germany, but he was basically integrated into the CIA structure. The Japanese guy made several trips here, but they put him up at a very, very prominent university in Japan, and both of them, so the German guy was actually tried and acquitted at Nuremberg because they fixed his trial. The guy that was in Japan, Ishii, he didn't even go to trial. They basically just protected him and put him in a university. And the experiments that he did on the people in China is, I mean, he experimented with anthrax. He experimented with all kinds of poisons and basically kept logs of how people reacted to them, and did just absolutely torturous experiments on them.
For those people that wonder, and I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but I do want to make the connection. You know, when we hear conspiracy theories like, you know, Frazzle Rip and Pizzagate and the adrenochrome stuff and all that, and people are like, oh, humans wouldn't do that. The unit here, let me bring it up so people can see what I'm talking about here. The unit 731 that you're talking about right here.
Yeah.
On this section, it brings up vivisection, if I'm saying that correctly. It says thousands of men and women, children, and infants.
Yes.
Interned at POW camps. I mean, I think they meant entered at POW camps were subjected to vivisection, often performed without anesthesia and usually lethal. Now, I had never heard of vivisection before, so I went to go look it up to see what it is. It's torture, and it involves organ harvesting, burning. Yes. I'm like, women and children, infants?
Yes.
And it's to study the body's reaction in the mind under extreme cases of duress.
Yes.
Which, if anybody has followed the stories of adrenochrome and things like that, you see where I'm going with that.
It's all from these two entities.
That is just, I mean, Fort Detrick gets brought up in this.
I know.
That's
They both came to Fort Detrick.
we're not talking foreign land.
No.
Like, that's here in our country.
Yes. But if you I don't bring a lot of that into this program, but during my daytime spaces, we've read some of the survivors of Operation Condor's statements in front of trials and trying to hold some of the criminals. So when the CIA overthrew Chile and Brazil and Uruguay and Paraguay and blah, 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 they installed military dictators. They set up black site prisons where all of this shit was done that they've learned that I'm going over tonight. They did this to people. This is where it came from. And the torture that they describe is very methodical. The way it's implemented, the things that they do, and a lot of it is traced back to both Japan and then the products that they use in the covert operations to Germany. And it all funneled through Sidney Gottlieb. And that's why it's critical to understand these people are basically Satanist, and that this stuff has been brought to the United States, incorporated into the United States Army at Fort Detrick and into the CIA. And then it's been spread everywhere through these regime changes. And the way you keep your dictator in charge is you pick dissidents out who then rat on through torture the other fellow dissidents so that you can keep your dictator in charge so that the U.S. oligarchs can exploit all of the resources in that targeted country. That's what this whole thing is about.
You know, I've through criminal investigations and other means, I've seen some just god-awful stuff that I wish I never saw. And the majority of the time with adult people, even the young ones you would still consider them young adults. I cannot imagine what a person has to be to do this to an infant or a child.
Yeah.
Like my brain, I know it's real. I know it exists, but my brain can't fathom how dark, like you have to be absent of soul to see something. I was
just going to say, these are soulless people. Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. You cannot have a soul and do any of this stuff. And I don't know how you get rid of it, but
these are the people we're fighting.
Yes, they have no soul and they can be shown no mercy. So Gottlieb, he retires in 1973 and basically tried to destroy all of the MK Ultra files. We know that some survived. Ewan Cameron died without facing any type of trial or compensation for his victims. And you have to try to get your head wrapped around how do these people not get held accountable. And it's because they were all protected, because they were providing useful information to even more evil people. There were universities, hospitals, pharmaceutical firms, and intelligence agencies that basically cooperated all knowingly what they were doing to create this apparatus. And basically you end up with like this technocratic state that doesn't look at the people as humans. They look at them as subjects in an experiment. The guy that we were talking about before, Kurt Blom, his post-war usefulness was in biological warfare. That was basically packaged as quote unquote defense, right? So in order to have a defense against these things that we created, then we have to actually create them, right? That's the logic that they're going to use. So he did research into aerializing pathogens, delivery systems, and toxic agents that would be fed directly into Cold War thinking about offensive and defensive biology. The line between protecting populations and studying how to harm them basically was removed. It wasn't just blurred, it was removed, because under the guise of creating these things to create the defense against them, they decided to unleash them on us. So once the state accepts the idea that a biological system has a strategic capability, it begins to think of the population in terms of managing it. Public health and national security begin to overlap. Surveillance becomes normalized, and prevention becomes preparation for conflict. And we know that biological agents has been used in just about every one of our wars. We were releasing biological agents on Cuba to destroy their crops, which also killed people. We used them in the Korean War. We used them in Vietnam. So then if you kind of zoom out a little bit, and you look more towards today, we all know, because we went through COVID, that there's a shit ton of biological labs around, right? All over the world. We know that a biological lab and Fort Detrick and a university, everything I just explained to you was used in creating the quote unquote COVID biological weapon, right? And it was done here, and then it was transported to an overseas lab that was also financed by the same apparatus. But we also now know that thanks to the US senators, primarily Richard Lugar from Indiana, but many others. The one in Ukraine and Georgia is actually named the Lugar Lab. That Georgia, the country of Georgia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan all have bioweapons for labs in them. So we basically surrounded the southern sector of Russia with biological warfare labs. And public reporting and official statements generally describe these as quote unquote biosafety, disease surveillance. And they will not describe them as offensive bioweapons, but they have the actual live bioweapons in them. And they experiment with them under the guise of creating defensive measures. But if you're looking for defensive measures, why would you put them on your number one target border? Why would you do that? Why would you go to the border of Russia and set up a bioweapons lab for defensive measures?
Because it ain't defensive.
Yeah. Okay. That's
It
what
actually, it goes into, I'll save it for the end of the show to read it. It was a statement made from one of the scientists in the Unit 731. And it's something out of a movie, but I'll read it at the end of the show.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. The history from Steiner to MK Ultra is not a straight line, but you can see the pedigree as it continues through this. And basically what I came away from all of this with is that the real lesson of history is whenever elites believe that life can be managed more effectively by experts than moral limits, the temptation to cross the line reappears. Steiner provided one early expression of the guided human development. The Cold War gave them the excuse to develop things like MK Ultra, Artichoke, and stuff like that, and that it's basically not an aberration. It was a designed endpoint that we saw manifested with COVID. So go ahead and read what you found.
All right, folks. If you got a queasy stomach, you might want to take your earbuds or microphones out for the next 30 seconds. The New York Times interviewed a former member of the Unit 731. Insisting on anonymity, the former Japanese medical assistant recounted his first experience in dissecting a live human being who had been deliberately infected with the plague for the purposes of developing plague bombs for war. Here's the quote. The fellow knew that it was over for him, and so he didn't struggle when they let him into the room and tied him down. But when I picked up the scalpel, that's when he began screaming. I cut him open from the chest to the stomach, and he screamed terribly, and his face was all twisted in agony. He made this unimaginable sound. He was screaming so horribly, but then he finally stopped. This was all in a day's work for the surgeons, but it really left an impression on me because it was my first time.
And I've read several of their statements from those people that were involved in those experiments. I mean, in some cases, they basically skin people alive as far as the torture, because they wanted to know how far they could go before they could actually, I mean, the experiments that they did on those people. And I don't know if you've read anything about the war between the Japanese and the Chinese. That's probably some of the most hideous things, where they would bury people alive up to their neck, pour honey on their head, and put ants all around them.
Terrible.
They did some of the most hideous things that I mean, if you read the book, Ghost Soldier, it talks about what the Japanese were doing to American soldiers, where they would take a tube and run it down their throat into their stomach. They would pump them full of water and make their stomachs really big, and then they would jump on their stomachs, like physically jump on them to torture them. The whole thing about running bamboo into their fingernails, all of that stuff. And the survivors all describe in that book all of the stuff that, as far as torture that was done to them, and what they saw done to others. And the Japanese soldiers would tell them, some of the ones that had been, fighting in China, when a lot of them talked about afterwards some of the horrific techniques and torture methods that they used. And China was doing it to Japan, but I didn't read anything that they did torture them. I'm not saying they didn't, but the stuff the Japanese did was super horrific.
It's next level. I did study into the torture stuff when I started to. There's a guy, Mitchell the Lionheart, and he's done a lot with the human trafficking, and a proponent for fighting for the Falun Gong. And so he's been a part of these operations. He's testified before a few of the international governments on it. And, he shared with my audience, some of the stuff that he's talked about. But then off the air, he's, gone into a little bit more detail with some of the stuff. And it's worse than the stuff you see in some of the scariest movies. Like it's that crazy. And the wild part is somebody had to think that up. And say, hey, you know what? Let's try this. Let's see where it goes. And then for us, I know we're good. We're inherently good people, so we struggle with that. But then again, what's his name that sent his son?
Yeah, Alan Dulles.
Thank you. His own child.
Yeah.
If they will do this to their own offspring. What do you think the limits are for anybody else? There is none.
Correct.
And so, a lot of times we hear, Colonel goes over this Operation Gladio stuff, and we're studying like the historic, situations that happen, but you can clearly see modern day people that fit that description. One of them, who seems to be in the spotlight lately, is Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Yep.
And we hear what he was doing to the Beagles.
Yep.
But are we going to truly believe that it stopped at Beagles?
No, I mean, they experimented on kids in orphanages here in the United States. They experimented on prisoners. They experimented on people in mental institutions in the United States. And the other part, to your point, we have said often on here that there are no terrorist organizations that were not funded and trained by the intelligence service. None of them. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all that shit you see on television that they say radical Islamists do, you're paying for it. The intelligence agencies created these things. They learned these things in terrorist training camps that were being funded both with covert and overt funding from the CIA, the MI6, Mossad, and all of that. These horrific things. The cartel's the same thing. MS-13 was trained in El Salvador by the CIA, and Felix Rodriguez was one of their trainers. These horrific things didn't just happen, and they're not isolated to these quote-unquote foreign forces. And again, I've read witness statements or survivor statements, probably a better way to say it, of the people that survived these black site prisons in South America. And what frustrates the hell out of me, and people who follow me on X know that, is when these assholes like that Caracal guy gets on television and says, oh yeah, I was a whistleblower for waterboarding. I'm like, you can take your waterboarding and stick it up your ass. If you think that's torture, we do that in military training. That isn't even like the icing on the cake when it comes to torture. What the CIA actually teaches, and it's in their there was like a surviving book of torture techniques that the CIA had been teaching, like at the School of Americas and stuff like that, on the stuff that they had done. And we've talked about it a little bit here about the electrodes and hooking them up to private. They would take one of the witness statement guys said that he watched a torture session because they would bring in the other ones to scare the shit out of them into talking and watch them kill somebody. They would take one of those electrical leads that was sharp and stick it in their ear and start shocking them. And then they would just cram it in their head and kill them right through their ear. The stuff that they did was just totally horrific.
I mean, look at what they subjected the entire world, but specifically in America. Look what they subjected us to during COVID.
Yeah,
you had the mental, psychological, torture that was being done. 6 feet isolation. Isolation is one of the first things that you do when you're going to do, torture methods on people.
Yep.
But we were having infants, brand new newborn babies, being told that they need to take remdesivir, knowing the history of its failures in the past,
of it killing people.
And we were giving it to brand new newborns.
Yep.
And
it was
again,
one big MK Ultra event.
It was. And, for those of you that made it through, and, kept your wits about you, kudos to you guys that were brave enough to do that. Not a lot of people were in positions to make that, and I won't accuse those people any fault to themselves, So here's I won't say the person's name. It's an audience member. And man, this was probably 3 years ago now. And it did change my perspective. I didn't have as much empathy prior to reading this email than afterwards. Yeah, I operated under the mindset, and I still do, to a point of nobody forced you to take it, up until you got into the military and some of the Biden's administration. But this particular man, who's a father, married, and kids, significant amount of kids, and he's saying, "Hey, man, I understand where you're coming from." He goes, "But if I didn't take it, I was going to lose my job. I wasn't in a position to get another job because we're already behind on bills. My family would have gone hungry and they would have went homeless." He goes, "And I knew what it was going to do to me. I just had to take it." So this was a man who knew it was dangerous, knew that there was going to be some type of medical risk in taking it, and did it anyways, because this was him saying, "Hey, I'm going to step out into the battlefield because I got to keep my family going." I mean, that was in America. That was not in another country.
Correct. That was the American government doing that to its own citizens.
And so, yeah, and when I read that story, it did make me pump the brakes and be like, I do got to show more empathy when it comes to the decisions that people had to make. It's just frustrating, no matter how you look at it. It's frustrating.
One of my best friends, I love him to death. He's still on active duty today. He did everything he could. He was a commander, to push back on that mandate. But at the end of the day, he was not going to resign. He had just over 18 years in the service, and he'd given it all. I mean, this is a combat guy. He's in the Air Force, but he's like a TAC P. He embeds in the Army. He busted his ass his entire life. He's been shot at. He's been, deployed. All but 5 years of his career was spent in Army units, calling in air support for him under fire. And he's like, "I'm not going to let him take it away from me." And he has 2 babies at the time, 2 babies, because him and his wife, they had to do the in vitro, whatever that is. And so they had kids way late in life. And he's like, "I can't take that away from them. That's their security." And he was in that exact same boat. And he has everything documented where he has a direct order from his boss, because he told his boss, "If you don't sign a letter giving me a direct order to do it, I'm not doing it." And he did. And then he has no choice but to do it. And that son of a bitch should be hung.
Well, the other thing that's concerning to me, one of the OGs, this goes back to when Spaces first came out. He's an Apache pilot, solid dude. As a matter of fact, he was going out to North Korea, and I think 22 or South Korea, in 22 or 23, he went out there. But he took it because that's his career. Like, every decision he made in life was to get to that point, and become an Apache pilot. And hey, he's going to take the chance. Then suffers an injury that pulls him from the ability to fly. So it's like, how jacked up is that?
Yeah.
Like, and I'm sure there's story after story, but here was the other part that concerned me, was he was public about his injury, but he also knew that was going to ultimately push him out. How many other guys are not going to disclose that they got a medical issue going on because they're, retirement's right around the corner? I got to ride this out. And now you're flying, a C-130 full of Marines in it.
Yeah, these bastards don't care. They absolutely, and that's why I wanted to start where I started, because they don't care. They don't view you as a human being. You're a log. As a matter of fact, that's what 731 called them. They didn't call them people. They were a log, because they kept a logbook on every individual that they brought into that camp. You were referred to as a log, not a person.
Well, Colonel, you want to let the audience know what you got coming up this week, where they can find you, and maybe something a little more bright and sunny? We're in a war, and these are the conversations that are going to surface sometimes. There's no way around it.
Yeah. We just have to understand how evil they are, because there's still people out there that have this kind of almost, and I know it's not in our audience, but this polyander. And what I hope to give people are tools to be able to softly disclose to people in their own time that they really do not view us as human beings. Your response to, oh, well, they just screwed this up, or, oh, well, this. No, they do not view us as human beings. They are soulless people. That's who they draw inspiration from. The satanical mysticism, Gnostic type of non-religion. And they believe in reincarnation, and they're happy to kill you because they believe they're doing you a favor by killing you. And if people can get their head wrapped around that, to me, it gives them the fighting spirit to do what's going to be necessary to do. And that's the other thing. People talk about violence in warfare. It is a hell of a lot less violent to put a bullet in somebody's head than it is to skin them alive. And those are battlefield choices. You are fighting an enemy that will experiment on your child. And there's no quarter given to those people. None. You don't get an ounce of sympathy from me, because you cease to be human when you experiment on people. You are not a human being, and you don't deserve to breathe the same air as I do. That's just the way it is.
I completely sign my signature on that one. Military tribunals is where I would like to see that ultimately end up, and make the consequences public, because that
your
level
choice is a noose or a firing squad. Those are your two choices.
And the reason being is that level of evil needs to see that there's finally a real consequence that they need to be afraid of. Like, that's the only way you keep that at bay. You're not going to make it go away. You're just going to keep it at bay.
Yeah.
If you don't find it, and if you can't find all of it and destroy all of it, you need to make evil have fear of good men that will go out and bring violence against that type of evil. Like, that needs to exist. Right. And that's why I tell people that you got to let Trump cook. If he's operating outside the realm of normal moves, it's because this is what he's fighting.
This is exactly what he's trying to destroy. I agree. All right. So what I have coming up, I will be, do you know who Crypto Rich is? Have you ever watched?
Don't think so.
He's but he's over in London. I've done a couple of shows with him. I've got another one coming up tomorrow at 5. He records them, so it won't be live. But I'll share it on my page. And then I've got 4 different podcasts on Friday. I know things has just been so crazy lately, but War Hamster at noon on Friday. You don't want to miss that one. And then I will not have my 4 o'clock space tomorrow, but I will be back on Friday at 4 o'clock. So,
well, there you have, folks. You'll catch me early in the morning tomorrow with CanCon. Then you'll catch me again at SitRep, and then we'll close out the night with Josh on Overwatch and The Guardian, and all the shows that Colonel's going to be doing on Friday are a must watch. So make sure you guys tune into all of them. And I will close this out with our last ad here on Rumble. And this one's for the kids, and it's free. So that's why I like to get this one out when I can. All right, parents, real talk for a second. America is about to hit a huge milestone. We're coming up on America's 250th birthday, 250 years of freedom, grit, sacrifice, and the greatest experiment in self-government the world has ever seen. This is the perfect moment to help your kids understand why this country matters. Not just fireworks and hot dogs, but the story behind it all. There's a free guide called The Kid's Guide to America's 250th Birthday, and it's honestly a great way to introduce kids to how America began, who the founding fathers were, what they risked, and why the ideas they fought for still matter today. The guide sends kids back to the moment when the brave men signed the Declaration of Independence, knowing full well that they were risking their lives for freedom. It breaks it all down in ways kids can actually understand and enjoy without watering it down or turning it into boring schoolwork. If you care about raising kids who know where this country came from and why it's worth preserving, this is something you'll want to grab. And the best part, it's completely free with this special offer. You just need to pay $2 for the shipping and postage. So just head to freeusabirthday.com. That's freeusabirthday.com, and the Kid's Guide to America's 250th Birthday for your kids today. America's story matters. Make sure the next generation knows it. And if you're watching the replay, you'll find the links to all those different partners and sponsorships down in the description, including the links to follow Colonel. So if this is your first time being exposed to her, there's so much more that's offered. And we also have a playlist right here on the AlphaWarrior Show called Operation Gladio, and it is up to date with the exception of tonight's show. So now next week, I am gone for GART in Nashville. So if I'm not going to put the Colonel on the spot, if Colonel has some availability this weekend, maybe we can pre-record the show for Wednesday. If not, I'll see what I can do about trying to go live from being out there in Nashville. We did that before at one of the GARTs, and it kind of worked. So I will work it out with Colonel. Just keep an eye out on social media to see if we're going to have one or not come Wednesday night. So other than that, Colonel, it's been an honor, and I'll catch you on the next one. Good night. God bless, and Semper Fi, everybody.